Ryan, we've been waiting to talk to you. Super excited. I know Latte's super excited. As soon as I mentioned that we're going to talk about AI, he's like, yes. Me, I'm kind of like, but we're chatting with you today. You're pretty much running the video game at Florida Atlantic University, and you do a ton of video from what I've seen, like sports and alumni and all of that. So I assume you're just tackling video all day. Talk to me about it. What's your day today?
No, thank you so much, guys, for having me. Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of stuff. So I kind of focus in the foundation alumni arm, where we really are creating content for not only people who just graduated, but 60 years of audiences, right? 60 years of graduates. So you can imagine it's a very broad base. FAU is a school that maybe just recently started to get more and more tradition. So, trying to find those things that are nostalgic that people connect to from the 60s, but also maybe when they graduated in 2010. So that's our challenge. And then on the foundation side, we're trying to also tell that story to donors, to people wanting to make, big gifts, whether it's $5 a month or $5 million a year. We're trying to find stories that kind of tell what FAU is and all about, and, amplify that and get those to the right people. So that's kind of what we do here.
That's awesome. And that sounds like a lot of time and a lot of work, and constantly having to think of new ways to tell the story.
Yeah, and luckily there's a lot, like working at a college like this, there's so many areas. So, yeah, we might tell the same scholarship story, but when you do that for different colleges, people have so many different backgrounds here. One of FAU's big bragging points is 33% of our students are first generation students. So, this is their first time for their entire family being in college. And, that's a story you can tell a million times because they all kind of have different variances, but it's that happy outcome that you want, and you want to tell to donors, you want to tell to our alumni because, for a lot of them, they were in that same position, years and years ago. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So you're a storyteller. We're storytellers. Seaberry, we do, visuals, anything visual for a company, from graphic design to video. I do a lot of video, journalist in my background. And then Latte, my gosh, he literally creates anything. They call him like the problem solver, the thinker for our company. So what we're all doing, AI is a pretty big subject that's been coming up. And I feel like every time you go through Instagram, it's just all these people like, oh, hate the AI. Oh, love the AI. And Latte, I mean, you love the AI.
I love its potential. So I think that the mistake I hear is a lot of people think that it's going to take their jobs. And quite frankly, if you think it's going to take your job, you're not being creative enough and thinking about how to use AI and its application, its potential. So that's where I stand. I think of it as that group of entities or people that I always wanted to have access to run with ideas that quite frankly, if they weren't there, or if AI wasn't there, that work just wouldn't get done, period. So it's more like there are greater opportunities to create some really wonderful things for the world that just would not have been created without it. So that's where I stand. Very positive force.
Where do you stand, Ryan?
I kind of agree. I think for me, AI really is going to free up a lot of your time, and like kind of things that maybe were repetitive that you had to just do. That's where AI I think is going to really take off. The creative area, which, the first time you get on ChatGPT and ask it to write a song about something and it does a pretty good job, like that's a little scary for a second, but then, the more you use it, the more you realize, okay, it has its strength in some areas, in some other areas, not so much. Like I like to use it as a brainstorming, once I've gotten every idea out that I think I can, I'll throw a prompt at it, and then boom, I have like 6 or 7 more things that I can maybe go down, little avenues that you can go down, but none of them are fully fleshed out. Like none of it is very broad topics that maybe I wasn't thinking about. That's how I've been kind of lucky enough to use it. So one of the other areas that I do, I have a YouTube channel outside of FAU where they do container homes. So like shipping containers, they build those out.
He loves those.
When you're trying to think of, we've been doing it for like 3 years now. So like, you think of every question you could have possibly made a video about. Now I can throw a question at AI, should I buy a shipping container home? It gives like all these things. And now I have like maybe 5 or 6 avenues or, ways we approach it differently, that, this AI has scoured the internet. These are obviously things people may have been asking or thinking about, subconsciously. That's now really good video topics that we can kind of use it for. Any kind of information-based questions. It's like people are using this almost like a Google search thing for some things. It's subconsciously pulling in data that a lot of questions are asked. So, for me, if you have a product, if your nonprofit is struggling to come up with what that voice or what you're trying to talk about is, and even AI is struggling, use those questions to kind of, guide that in some of the content you create, or, get some of those questions answered through the content you make. So that's like some of the areas I think are really kind of interesting. I've heard people say though, like the most recent iteration of it's actually worse. So it's kind of getting dumber as it starts to get more and more information.
Has it learned more about us?
Right. I don't know if that's like good or bad. But I seriously remember asking it to write a song about FAU, and it wrote this like really sick, song. And, I was like, this is the future. I remember like it was like around Christmas. I remember showing my mom, and it was like, we're all done. This is over. Skynet's here. You think like we're about to go off, and then like you start playing with it. For me, I just think that's such a cool thing where, you only have so much, like I could walk away, maybe think of some of those things, but, it does kind of give a different lens to some of the content we can create.
I got to ask about the container, the Container Homes video channel. So do you create your own container homes? Is this more like you're fascinated by the subject, or? Yeah.
So we actually, I met this guy who was a general contractor, and he started one on his own, and then he like wanted to kind of up the quality. So we started kind of just creating content, documenting his business, right? So like all YouTube channels, it was very DIY to start, a lot of GoPro shots, and, just him talking. And he's so knowledgeable on just building things. He was able to kind of figure it out. And it was cool because it was a DIY approach to something that's becoming a little more manufactured process. And then, his best video at that point was a pricing video, because, you look up Google, it's like, well, how much does this thing cost? That's the number of questions. So he made a pricing video, got like 2 million views, and we just like blew up from there. So now I think we're at like 140,000 subscribers. He just pitched Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank on other platform. So they're going to be launching this big fundraising campaign, raise millions of dollars. So they, it started though with a YouTube channel and just kind of exploring, going down this rabbit hole, asking questions. But he's kind of turned it into a business from, building one in his front yard. Now he has a full manufacturing facility, and we get to make even more content. So we're really blessed with that. But, again, 3 years of being with any client or any like group, you start to kind of get a little stale. You're like, man, I feel like we're doing the same thing over. So, being able to use AI and, even like the content that we create that's not going to the broad public, that may be just going to his core audience, potential investors. We've really been able to kind of niche down on some things that don't take a lot of editing time, but the messaging and what we use it for is actually really, really powerful, because it's answering questions out of an investor looking to, spend millions of dollars on these might think of. So it's kind of cool.
That's awesome. Okay. So specifically, I'm curious about it because, there are a lot of ways to use AI, and AI is a very big, very, very big term. And there's just a lot that's there. So can you break down what that means for you? Like what's included in AI? You mentioned ChatGPT. I'm assuming 3.5, not 4. So what are you actually? What's that?
Still on the free version.
Totally. Yeah.
I haven't paid for one yet.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, like the thing that's, I think a lot of people think like AI is thrown around so much right now. There's machine learning, which I think most of it is, which I don't know. Like the one thing that I think is going to be really interesting for at least the media side of it is how machine learning might be used on, normal workflow things. So, I mean, even Adobe, I don't know if you've done Adobe podcast, and thrown like, I mean, I've had some audio that was rough, like there's just wind or something going on, or you hear a car go by, you throw it in this thing and it sounds like you were in a recording studio. I mean, for me though, like, yeah, I could probably figure out how to reduce that maybe just as good, but I mean, this thing does it in 10 seconds, right?
Yep.
I know there's another app that like literally cuts podcasts like this and cuts between 8 different cameras and does it in a minute versus, the 20 minutes you might take. So I think AI and machine learning stuff like that's going to really reclaim time for creators and make us be able to, do the fun stuff, the more creative stuff, not maybe to cut another podcast and, it's like not very mindless cutting. But AI as a whole though, eventually I'm sure it's going to be able to make very intense decisions, right? As they kind of build this thing out, it's going to be able to make things that maybe more of a human would be able to make. You can have if-then statements and all that stuff for a million different things, but still at the end of the day, a human had to kind of get it there. And as AI grows, who knows? We might see it, any job that uses Excel and does a very manual process, I would probably not, I'd be a little more worried. Like maybe accountants, it may make a lot of their jobs easier, but it also may cut some of those jobs. I think that fear of some of those jobs that have manual tasks like that, especially a lot of numbers-based jobs, I would be a little bit more worried. Who knows? But, I still think we're at least a few months off from that. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I get that fear though. Like when Andrew, he did a video on his tips and tricks where he was showing the Adobe podcast capabilities to take out background noise. And for a lot of my journalism career, I was the person people would give their audio to because I was really good in audition and getting audio out. And I don't know why, but it was just something I enjoyed. Oh, send it to audio. And it gave me a lot of pride that when I saw Andrew's video, I was kind of like, wait a minute, there goes something that I spent time getting good at that a lot of people couldn't be good at. And so I feel like that initial reaction for a lot of people, seeing that something can make their workflow better, because really I could be thinking about it as, oh, great, people don't have to send me all this stuff and I can focus on my own work instead of helping them out with theirs. That initial wait a minute, there's something that I specialized in, that I was good at, and now this machine is good at, does create this fear and flood our Instagrams with the...
I kind of compare it to back in, back when DSLR started to come out and the quality of cameras really got a lot better for a lower price point. They said that was a big democratization. I'm not even going to try to say that right. It just basically lowered the bar for people to enter, very cinematic storytelling in film. I think this is going to really make it a lot easier for folks to create really high quality content on a shoestring budget. And, even the creator that's going out there doing those TikTok interviews on the street, crappy audio, now they could have really solid audio. I think whoever can figure out how to incorporate that into the next phone, or incorporate some of these things into where it's almost does it for you automatically, that's the really interesting part of AI, is how many things that we use on a daily basis are going to have it running underneath, and it's going to be seamless. You won't even know. You don't have to upload it automatically. It just does it. I feel like every few months I see oh yeah, editing, AI editor that does edits for videos. Will it ever get there? I don't know. It might get you 50% of the way there, which may save you some time, but for narrative video and that, even documentary, I don't think there's just too many decisions that have to be made on a cut. Maybe a simple TikTok video, or I know there was one too that you could put feed a full video in and it automatically cut it for vertical video and stuff. And I just don't know. I don't think it's never going to be exactly what you need. So I think there's a lot of promises, but there's a million AI companies popping up and they're all doing kind of similar things.
Yeah. I wanted to also speak to the Adobe podcast just for a second to say, for me, it was like a backlog for me, right? So I would create these little videos. I'm not a videographer, I'm a designer. And so I'd create something that needed to have the audio improved. And quite frankly, my go-to person was Adia, right? And the problem with that was...
I'm losing my space.
No, but you weren't losing. The thing was, you had so many other things. For you to take on my project was really it was something in the back of your mind that I was kind of forcing for you to make a priority, right? And so it's more for me, Adobe Podcast is the backlog tool. In fact, I started using it without Andrew, Adia, the rest of the Seaberry team knowing that I was using it, and I would just create this thing. And they're like, "How did you clean that up?" And I'm like, "Oh, I just figured it out." Right? Because that was part of the fun of it. It's just
I found a cool YouTube video and figured it out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mastered it on my own in my free time. I did not. Yeah. And so to be able to just use that and realize no longer did I have to be in Adia's backlog to get this thing made. I could just take care of it. And maybe the quality's not going to be quite as high, but you know what? It is much better to have that thing done than sitting there where I know I can't get it out the door without that slight improvement. So for me, it's kind of getting back to that point of like, it allows the creation of more things. That's a perfect example. Like, this is not taking away Adia's job. She's too smart for doing that stuff, right? That's not where she should be focusing. The focus for all of us is to get things out the door. And so how do you do that really effectively? And I think one of those tools ends up being something like Adobe Podcast for that reason, you know?
Well, and I think like, Adia's skill set, yeah, she can clean up audio, but she's a broadcaster. She knows how to ask questions. She knows how to get the best out of interviews and stuff. That's what people are paying her for. Like I said, a byproduct of that is the audio sounds really good. These are all like skill sets that, you do need to have, but, now it's a little bit easier.
So, the new stuff comes out, you get that wave of like everyone using it, and then they're freaking out about it, and then you realize its limitations. And I don't know what kind of limitations you guys have noticed in the AI that you're using, but there's the stuff that shows up where like the hand has like 17 fingers.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So what are the things that kind of give you faith in the ability of humans to use AI and continue to make great things and not lose to the AI, I guess? There's probably like a lot of things that's like, we can use this, but there's that one picture that keeps showing up was like, in order for AI to take all of our jobs, clients would have to know what they want or something like that. Like there's still this need for humans. I didn't come up with that.
You just shot down all the AI taking our jobs.
Yeah.
Talk with that. That's like so true.
I would say so. One of the founders of Wired magazine had this really great description of AI as the first conversational interface, right? So this idea that it is a back and forth conversation for you to get what you want out of it. Like, it's almost like asking 20 questions. Adia, honestly, I think you would enjoy going down the rabbit hole of playing with AI because you're journalistic.
I did.
Yeah. Your background, I think you would really enjoy the iterations because it takes a lot of iterations. It actually takes a lot of patience to get there. So right now I'm not experiencing, multiple fingers, planes. Like if you ask DALL-E, for instance, to create, I tried to create an Earth with planes flying around it, and the planes that it shows up with are the most bizarre looking, like all of the planes would crash. So there's that realism factor that it doesn't get right. But in terms of just the experimentation of ideas, especially on the visual front, I'd say on the visual front, it falls pretty short on some more abstract interpretations. I've seen really lifelike, like it depends on which one you're talking about. Some of them are just spot on. Some, it's very hard to see the difference between a human that you know and you talk with on a daily basis and something that's been generated in AI. But then some things, it's way off. And so, the visual side, I think it's going to get there. It's just going to be better over time. And that's not fear. It's not something that creates fear for me. Once again, it's this opportunity to explore. Like if you're a creative person and you want to explore a new idea, it's going to let you at least try it out and see if it works, and probably do it in a few seconds versus you spending a few days, right? And really allows you to approach an idea and at least say, well, am I even in the ballpark? Which is honestly like a really positive. I know I'm going back to the positive side.
Well, that's what I'm positive.
Yeah. So yeah, what I see is a really optimistic place where you can just experiment to your heart's content with very little downside to it. Unless your downside is you should be doing something else with your time. It's a very good use of your time to explore an idea. So for that side, I'm not seeing the downside yet. I mean, obviously, if AI switches from good to evil,
as it usually does in the movie,
it gets weaponized, and obviously other people can weaponize it, right? But if you're using it from a moral perspective and you're exploring things from an optimistic perspective, I think it's all upside, all of it.
You're right about the rabbit hole, though. Like when I opened up DALL-E, what was supposed to be like, oh, let me try this out to see if I can get a social media post faster because everybody's busy on the graphics team, turned into like hours of me rephrasing my question and like, oh, look at that. And then like making another question. Well, look at that. So it's true. So what do you think that people, designers or filmmakers, people who are in our industry, how should they look at AI? How should they be using AI? What actionable advice do you guys have? Now, since you've embraced it, like, okay, how can it help me here? How can it help me there? How can you help other people feel that?
I think it's really interesting because I work in higher ed right now. And, the first few months of this, like back in early this year when it started to kind of grow, it's crazy how fast the adoption came amongst the students. And I don't think through the semester, I don't think professors were able to adapt and kind of change their grading policies. So like, I have a room full of students across the way and they're all using it to expand their papers to whatever the minimum, word count needs to be.
Oh my gosh. Where was that?
For me, it's actually, they're using technology and like, this is the future. If they don't learn it now, they're going to get left behind.
Yeah.
So like, I do have my logic behind it. But, I think it's, again, how do you use it to, hopefully be creative or, you still need that core understanding of whatever the topic is. If you don't, you're done. But, I'm curious to see how like big industries, especially these content companies, will they use it for good? Will they just try to, automate writer jobs? And like, we've even seen like just with how much content's coming out, so much crap is being made right now. Like not to knock any Disney shows, but some of these Disney shows have $200 million budgets. And even then the writing is like the weakest part of the whole thing. But yeah, it's using AI and algorithms to kind of come up with what is going to maybe hit with your audience because this actor's in it and this director is attached to it. And it looks like this other movie that was really popular. Like, I think that's the biggest fear. I do want to say one more thing too about, another creative area I've seen AI use too is the, being able to expand sets and stuff. We almost did it for a shoot with our athletics department, where, you basically can like take this window that you see on this podcast and then expand it. So my office looks like I'm, in New York City on a skyrise and stuff. There's some really cool YouTubers that did some cool stuff with it, but that's, I think, something kind of interesting where, with green screen now you could like literally use that to create really cool, 3D sets and not have to have $1 billion budget to make it work. So I think like the lower scale, productions and that type of stuff will be able to really use that well. It's, at the end of the day, the big scale budgets are going to still have artists and they should make stuff that actually fits. But I think for like quick throwaway shots that you don't have a budget for, like, or quick things that you just need AI to generate a cool image that will, hopefully be really quick. I still think it's a little wonky and like the finger thing still freaks me out.
Velocity does that for photos, filling in all the gaps to make this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Photoshop beta. Photoshop beta is really before that I was using the stamp tool and I was doing a lot of Photoshop editing, and it's actually pretty quick to do it without AI, but AI is just really fun to play with. So, I did it recently for an Instagram post where the photo was taken as, I think it was taken as a vertical or horizontal. Either way, it was the wrong ratio. And to fill in the gap, it was taken as a horizontal, right? So it was this horizontal, like a 16:9 photo. And I had to turn it into a square format, or actually, no, into a 9:16. And so it was just a joy, honestly, to throw AI at it to say, I need a ceiling here and I need this down here. And, the way that Photoshop beta works is it will give you 3 samples. I'm kind of telling this for everybody else. So it gives you 3 options and then it makes you choose between those 3. And if you don't like those 3, guess what? You just hit the button again, generate, and it does 3 more. And you can change the description to get a little bit finer. And so the beautiful thing about that is in choosing those 3 through maybe 9, 12 different options, you'll end up with something that's somewhat decent. And then maybe you go back through and you still use your traditional stamp tools and things like that. But it's a pretty easy workflow. And I could spend the time doing it in the traditional fashion. There's no need to. It's great to take advantage of that just so I can get things out the door, and it doesn't have to be perfect, which is coming from somebody that I used to really focus on that perfect side of things. And what I'm finding with AI is it's an opportunity to just be able to do another thing, explore another idea. So why belabor the point? Why focus on it? It's okay if it has some AI elements within it, but there's still at the kernel of it, it's still an original idea from a human. And to go back to your point earlier, writers' rooms. At my college, in my alma mater, they had a bunch of people who have seen a lot of success in the film industry talking about how they were used to having writers' rooms where they would be able to collaborate and interact with a bunch of writers. And that's being reduced down to potentially just 2 writers in a room that are actually taking in the content that has first been created by AI, and they're supposed to do rewrites on top of that content, which actually is like the reverse of the process. I think if you have great ideas at the beginning, AI helps you out, and then you have great ideas to make it special again. That sounds like a hell of a lot better of a workflow than the reverse, where somehow you're supposed to be the machine at the end of the line for the machines. That it seems backwards, and a big concern.
I'm really excited, Ryan, to get like updates. I'm going to start pinging you because there's something that you said about your access to education and kids and young people and how they're using this tech. You will literally be on the front lines of all the things that it's capable of. And I'm sure, like, I just imagine you're soaking that in all day. Like, oh, look what they just did with that. Look what they just did with that.
It's fascinating. I mean, even our interns that we have, they were on it before me, and I asked an intern to come up with like an email sequence for something we were doing, and I don't know, 2 hours later she had this full thing. I'm like, this is what is this? And then I read it, and again, this is pretty good. It gets you 90% there. How it changes, and then she starts. I was like, did you use ChatGPT for this? She's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, go for it. That's fine. Sure, give you some ideas, but again, the thing that intern didn't realize is you still need the core knowledge. You still need to know how digital marketing work for that to actually be effective. It can give you a few ideas that maybe you can run with or lay out the structure of how that website page needs to look. But the content still, you are the expert on that. You need to know that like the back of your hand, and then use AI to expand on it and make it better. The one thing I've been using it for now is some scripts, for some videos that we do is, I asked it to make this speech sound like Walt Disney, very aspirational, very, futuristic or futurist. And, it pulls like a sentence or two. I'm like, that's awesome. I'm going to throw something like that in there, maybe adjust it. Then, hey, can you make this sound like Abraham Lincoln or something? It's fun to ask it and rephrase scripts and stuff, because then you can get a few different phrases and stuff. And again, just have it regenerate multiple times until you get something you like. That's something that just plussing something I've already made. And, for me, I think that's kind of, hopefully my boss, I like to joke, we do Disney updates, Walt Disney updates from the 60s, showing Disneyland. Well, FAU, we're showing off Disney World here, and we're showing off all the cool things we're doing. Sometimes I need that extra positivity line that Walt Disney may have said, and we put it in the video. So, I think that's again, it's just plussing what's already been made, or the human came up with it first, then let AI kind of maybe some of it.
I'm excited to see what humans get artificial intelligence to do next. Any final predictions? Anything you want to?
The worst student thing, they had they wrote 100 words, and then they had AI extend it to 1,000. And I was like,
oh my gosh,
that's and you could it's 3 or 4 paragraphs with the same exact point, just rephrased. And I'm like, okay, your teacher's probably not gonna, because it was all I love history, so it was I can't remember, it was something something in Reconstruction for Civil War and stuff. And I was just you're saying the same thing here 3 paragraphs in a row. I think you should probably. But then what they did was they came up with the 5 paragraphs or whatever that's going to get them 1,000 words, and each paragraph they're are 200 words. Boom, boom, boom. Then you got a great paper, and A+ later, and they're rocking and rolling. But luckily I was in the room. I help them out. I don't condone cheating, and I hope they understand and remember Reconstruction for the rest of their life. But they use technology given to be better.
Awesome.
The Yeah, you were asking about predictions. So it's funny. There is a tool out there that I found to be novel. It's fun for people to play around with, but it already exists. So it's not a prediction, but just one of those of, well, maybe is that the best use of AI? So you probably heard about it, but it is fascinating to see. It's the AI program that can actually have you always looking at the camera. So instead of reading your script, so everybody that tries it out is like, yeah, it's really fun. Check it out. And then you realize they're not really blinking. And it's also a little disarming that they're just constantly having a staring contest with you. So that is not a prediction, but it's worth checking out. And it is bizarre. So I would love to say that I have a prediction. And the thing is that AI is being used, like there are so many AI startups at this point in time that it's hard to come up with something that it's not being used for, right? Like you name the industry, AI is definitely, or at least machine learning, to Ryan's point, is at least part of the consideration. Like, for instance, AI in interior design. Ryan, considering the fact that you guys are working on, cargo box containers, I'm positive you've seen that, right? But AI in interior design is a really interesting application because there's so much variation in rooms. But that's not a bad prediction. That's probably happening already, right? It's anywhere where there's a lot of data crunching, and that can come in the form of just a lot of inputs and outputs. You're probably going to see AI have a big hand in making that into something that is a bit unrecognizable from what it's been in the past few years. And is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. If it takes away people's jobs and people aren't able to make that change, then that's a really bad thing for those people. And it's a really bad thing for society in that way. But as long as it's like a good use and somebody can level up, like they get away from having to make adjustments to other people's audio levels, that seems like a really good use of a tool, right? So it's, maybe I'm constantly spinning it towards the positive, but I'm hopeful, is really what it comes down to.
Can you send me the link to the eye thing? I'm going to put it right here. And then I have a meeting in like 15 minutes and I'm going to use it.
Ryan, this has been such a pleasure, man. I honestly, obviously we could talk AI for quite a long time, and I would actually like to do that. And honestly, shipping container homes, I am down for a conversation with you about that too, and I will check out that
Containing
YouTube.
Luxury, just check it out on YouTube.
Containing Luxury.
All like and subscribe, and we're doing some cool stuff.
Awesome, yeah. Follow that link right there.
Literally put every link that's mentioned. I think we have someone at all points in time is pointing somewhere. So we're good.
Unless you're listening in your car, just don't do that. Wait till you get home to check it out.
Thank you guys. Thank you all so much. This was a great conversation.
Awesome.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Bye.